Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings and FanDuel MLB Benny's Bats edition for Thursday, June 16th. There are 10 games on tap today. 7 of them are at the night slate starting at 7 o'clock. So those are the games that we're going to be talking about today. What we like to do here in the Benny's Bats section is we look at each pitcher that's on the mound, try to figure out what their weaknesses are, and then figure out which bats on the other team profile to do the best against them. So let's start right at the top with that Toronto and Philadelphia game. Got Aaron Nola on the mound for Philadelphia, and he's been pretty good. You know, he had a bad start last time out, a little bit up and down, but he's very tough on right-handed bats, and the Blue Jays have a very right-handed dominant lineup. Michael Saunders has been banged up for them and not playing. He's one of the big left-handed bats they have. They're basically down to like Justin Smoke and, Ezekiel Carrera as the only guys that hit from the left side that kind of profile to do well against Nola. Now, you do have guys like Joey Batista, Josh Donaldson, Edwin Encarnacion. These guys all do hit right-handed pitching well, but like I said, it's not an easy matchup for them. Nola's very tough on right-handed batters. I think he could have a pretty good start here against Toronto. On the other side of this game, you got J.A. Happ, the lefty. Right-handed bats hit him for a higher average and more power. Guy like Tommy Joseph kind of stands out for me. Bats clean up right now for the Phillies. He's a young kid, power hitting, future first baseman for them. He smashes left-handed pitching, although it has been limited at bats in the major league, so it's not a large sample size. But so far, he's done very well against lefties, and he did well against lefties in the minors as well. You could also look at a guy like Andres Blanco. Andres Blanco has a 393 WOBA and a 204 ISO against left-handed pitching since the start of last season. He hit third for them yesterday. So if he's in the 3 spot again today, very cheap. I think he's second and third base eligible on DraftKings. I think third base eligible and near mint price over on FanDuel as well. So he's another guy that I would look at. The last guy I'd look at, Carlos Ruiz, the catcher. 370 WOBA, 213 ISO score. That's a really good, really good numbers for a catcher. Even if he's not in and they decide to go with Cameron Rupp hits left-handed pitching pretty well too. So either one of the catchers on this Philadelphia team could be in play here, depending which one gets the start. They both tend to hit like 5th in the order at worst. So you get a guy who's a catcher hitting in the middle of the order with some pretty good numbers in his preferred splits. That's definitely something that I'm going to be interested in. Next game we can talk about Baltimore at Boston. Eduardo Rodriguez on the mound for Boston, and he was really good last year, but he hasn't been great so far in his first 3 starts of 2016. The reason for it is right-handed bats are hitting him much better this year than they did last year. Right-handed bats right now have a 269 average against them, and they have 5 home runs already in only 13 innings pitched. His fly ball rate is much higher this year to right-handed bats than it was last season, and it's obviously been something that's been a problem for him. You look at this Baltimore team, and they got a lot of right-handed bats that can put the ball in the air and hit some home runs. Mark Trumbo, probably my favorite one. He's been smashing left-handed pitching all season. 356 WOBA since the start of last year, 274 ISO score. So, this is definitely a guy that has a lot of power, and I think could be taking Eduardo Rodriguez yard today. You also have Manny Machado, excuse me, 355 WOBA, 206 ISO score for him. Always a solid batter. I actually like him a little more in righty on righty situations, but, he hits left-handed pitching pretty well too from the top of that order. And then Adam Jones, who's actually been leading off for them lately. His numbers this year and last year aren't as great as they've been over his career, but this is a guy who has owned left-handed pitching throughout his entire career. So I think he's another guy that we can look at today. I do think that this Baltimore team is going to put up some runs against Boston, and I think that this is going to be a pretty high-scoring game. On the other side of this game, we got Tyler Wilson pitching for Baltimore. Both right and left-handed bats have done okay against him, but right-handed bats actually have the higher fly ball rate and, the higher home run rate as well to go along with it. A guy like Mookie Betts, I think, is in a really good spot. 360 WOBA, 200 ISO score. Was 2 for 5 last game against Tyler Wilson. So not only does he profile well, but he's actually hit him well in the past. You also have a guy like Xander Bogaerts having a really good 2016. He went 3 for 4 off Wilson with a couple of doubles in their last matchup, so I'm looking for him to have another big game. And then David Ortiz is a guy that we have to talk about anytime as a right-handed pitcher on the mound, even if he's more of a reverse splits kind of guy like Tyler Wilson is. Ortiz has a 430 WOBA, a 300-plus ISO score against right-handed pitching, so this is definitely somebody that you want to have some exposure to. whether or not you're playing a stack of Boston, I still think that David Ortiz makes sense, even as a one-off if you can afford him. Next game we can talk about, we got the Pittsburgh Pirates going up against the New York Mets. Juan Nicasio on the mound for Pittsburgh. He's not been all that great lately. He's given up a few more hits, given up a few more walks, and he's really given up more home runs. Now, that's a problem because if you're giving up more hits and walks, that means that you're putting guys on base. And then if your home run rate is up and you're giving up more home runs, you're giving up 2 and 3 run shots, which, you give up 2 of those in a game. Next thing you know, you've given up 4 or 5 earned runs, and you're not in line for the win. You're not in line for a good start, and, it's going to be a rough day for you. Left-handed bats actually have a higher average against them. He has been tough on righties. So a guy like Cespedes, who is good in righty-on-righty matchups, probably not the greatest spot for him. I'd probably be looking more at guys like maybe Curtis Granderson, 374 WOBA, 231 ISO from him, big left-handed bat. Maybe a Neil Walker. With all the injuries they have, Walker's been batting in like the 5-hole lately. So you're getting a guy in a good RBI spot that plays second base, which isn't usually a good RBI, position. So I think Walker is somebody we can look at. He's very good against right-handed pitching. Hasn't been phenomenal this year, but he has always hit right-handed pitching better. He's a much better bat from the left side of the plate. On the other side of this game, we got Bartolo Colon. Left-handed bats are slightly better against him, but right-handed bats are okay too. A guy like Gregory Polanco probably stands out the most. Has been hitting in the 3-hole lately. Has cooled off a little bit since the on-fire, blazing start that he had, but he is still one of the best left-handed bats that Pittsburgh has to throw out there against Cologne. The right-handers aren't bad either. You got a couple guys with WOBAs over 360, Andrew McCutcheon, Jung Ho Kong, maybe even a guy like Josh Harrison, I think, is in a good spot here as well. So, Cologne is not a guy that I'm scared of. If you look at the numbers, guys are hitting 270, 280 against them from both sides of the plate. I do think you can stack up some of these Pittsburgh bats. Although, remember, the game is in Citi Field. Citi Field is not a great hitter's ballpark. And the weather's a little bit overcast here today. It's not really the greatest day for hitting. But I do think that Pittsburgh's going to wind up getting the Bartolo. Next game we can talk about, we got the Yankees going up against the Minnesota Twins. CC Sabathia on the mound for the Yankees. He's very tough on left-handed bats, even last year when he wasn't having a good season. Right-handed bats tend to hit him for a higher average and more home runs. In 2015, right-handed bats had over a 300 average against them, over 20 home runs and like 140 innings or something like that. This year, he's been much tougher on right-handed bats. They're only hitting about 220 against them, and I think that's been a big reason for his turnaround and why he's been so good this year. You look at that Minnesota team, they do have a lot of right-handed bats to throw at him. A guy like Eduardo Nunez up at the top of the order, 348 WOBA, 280 ISO score, so he's somebody that's in play. Actually probably has the best numbers on this Twins team against left-handed pitching. But they do have a lot of guys that are right-handed that could, take CC deep and give him some trouble. Guys like Brian Dozier, guys like Trevor Plouffe, guys like Byung-Ho Park. All 3 of these guys I think are in a decent spot here against CC today. So, Sabathia has been very good lately. I think I would only want to roll him out there in a tournament, though. I don't think I have enough faith in him against this right-handed dominant lineup that, he's going to go out there and put up another great game. On the other side of this game, we got Kyle Gibson, the righty. Left-handed bats have done, much better against him. The problem with him is he has a low fly ball rate. He's a guy who tends to keep the ball on the ground, does give up a lot of hits, does give up a lot of base runners, but doesn't really get tagged for a lot of home runs. So I think guys like Ellsbury and Gardner are in pretty good spots here. These are guys that can rack up a couple hits, maybe steal a base for you, score a couple runs. I really kind of like them today. I think you can also look at a guy like Beltran if he's in there, 356 WOBA, 216 ISO against right-handed pitching. So he's another valid option. And then as a catcher option, I think Brian McCann is always in play whenever you face a right-handed pitcher. Next game we can talk about, we got the Detroit Tigers going up against the Kansas City Royals. Justin Verlander on the mound for Detroit. And Verlander is another guy who's kind of turned back the clock. Right-handed bats hit it a little better against him this year at about a 224 average. It's been very tough on lefties who are hitting barely over 200 against them. Right-handers do have the higher fly ball rate and more home runs, so that would probably be the way you want to attack them. Maybe a guy like Whit Merrifield on the top of that Kansas City order. 360 WOBA for him, 188 ISO, righty on righty situations. He's been really solid. He's kind of been a gem for them this year. He's hitting up at the top of the order right now, getting the max number of at-bats. And he's still pretty cheap on most of the sites, depending on where you're playing. The one lefty that I really like is Eric Hosmer. 390 WOBA, 193 ISO. He's 19 of 69 lifetime against Verlander, including 4 of 11 last year. A lot of the outs that he made had come earlier in his career. The last 2 years or so, he's hitting over 300 against Verlander. And with these two teams being in the same division, you have a pretty large sample size that you could look at here and something that you could actually draw some conclusions from. On the other side of this game, Danny Duffy is pitching, and Duffy's actually looked pretty good lately. The problem I have here is Duffy's a left-handed pitcher, struggles more with right-handed bats. They have a high average against them, a huge fly ball percentage, and, they have hit a couple home runs off of him. You look at this Detroit team, every bat on this Detroit team is basically a right-handed bat. You start right at the top of the lineup. You got guys like Kinsler, J.D. Martinez, Miguel Cabrera. Victor Martinez is in there batting from the right side. He's another guy you can look at. Nick Castellanos is another guy. Justin Upton is another guy. There's 5 or 6 really good right-handed bats in this lineup. So even though I like Duffy and I don't think that they're going to light him up today, I do think they're going to tag him for a couple runs because he does struggle with the right-handed bats. And like I said, Detroit is able to throw 6 or 7 right-handed bats at you. 4 or 5 of them who've already been to all-star games in their career. So these are some really, really solid right-handed hitters. I know they don't have amazing numbers that pop off the page against left-handed pitching, but this Detroit team can hit a lefty, and I do think they're going to give Danny Duffy a little bit of a tough time here. Next game, we can talk about Milwaukee at the LA Dodgers. Got Scott Kazmir on the mound for the Dodgers. Right-handed bats, higher average, higher fly ball rate, more home runs against them. And this Milwaukee team can hit left-handed pitching because they do have some big right-handed bats. Ryan Braun, probably the biggest of those bats, 421 WOBA, 251 ISO since the start of last season. Definitely somebody with some home run upside. He has the power to go yard. He can pound out a bunch of hits. Just a very, very solid play. And I think his price is pretty reasonable. He's like $4,000 on DraftKings today, which seems a little bit cheap to me. You can also look at a guy like Jonathan Villar, another guy who I think is kind of cheap, 3,800 shortstop option. 373 WOBA, 171 ISO score against left-handed pitching. So he's another guy that's in play. You can look at a catcher like Jonathan Lucroy. You can look at a first baseman like Chris Carter. Maybe even a guy like Aaron Hill, who's already shown some pop against left-handed pitching this year. There are quite a few guys in this Milwaukee team that I think make some sense to use, and I don't think it's going to be a very good game for Kazmir. I think Milwaukee is going to be able to get some runs against them. On the other side of the game, we got the rookie Junior Guerrera pitching. Both right and left-handed bats are only hitting like 220, 230 against them, although right-handed bats have a pretty high fly ball ratio, which so far hasn't hurt him, but could turn into a problem for him at some point. That means a guy like Justin Turner, righty on righty, very good hitter, very solid bat. He's hitting 3rd in the order for them. I think he's going to be somebody in play. I also like Trace Thompson, righty on righty matchups, 364 WOBA, 220 ISO since the start of last season. Again, another guy that's pretty solid righty on righty that profiles to do well against Guerra. And then the one left-handed bat I really like is Corey Seager. Seager, 380 WOBA, 230 ISO score. Not a lot of shortstop options that we have out there today. He's easily one of the best of them. And, he's kind of been hot and he's been hitting the ball well lately. So I do think Seager's somebody that's in play. Last game we can talk about, we got the Washington Nationals at the San Diego Padres. Tanner Roark is on the mound for Washington, and he's been really good in 2016. He's had 1 or 2 bad starts, but the rest of them he's been returning, 20 to 30 fantasy points on a pretty consistent basis. He's very tough on right-handed bats. You look at the San Diego lineup, it's mostly right-handed bats, so I could definitely see Roark having a pretty good game. San Diego has struggled with right-handed pitching all season long. Maybe you can look at a guy like Yangervis Solarte or, a John Jay up at top of the order. But neither one of these guys are really jumping off the page to me as guys that are going to scare me off of Tanner Roark. I think Roark's one of the better pitchers that's on the mound today. I know he's not cheap, but this matchup is just so good for him that, I still think he's going to put up a pretty decent number, worst case scenario. On the other side of the game, I do think we can pick on Eric Johnson. Eric Johnson, big right-hander, made 3 starts so far this year and has a whip of 1.90, meaning he's basically giving up about 2 base runners per inning. He's given up 4 or more runs in every one of the 3 starts he's had so far this year, so I definitely think this is a guy we can pick on. Left-handed bats have done better against him, so a guy like Harper, 452 WOBA, 324 ISO score for him. So just absolutely monster numbers. If they decide to pitch to him, I think that Harper would be able to do some damage here. I also like Daniel Murphy, 375 WOBA, 219 ISO. His batting average has dropped from the 390s down to the the high 360s, low 370s. Again, I mean, we say that like it's a horrible thing. It's a 20-point drop in his batting average. But again, the guy was hitting, just below Ted Williams kind of numbers so far to start this year. He's still somebody who gets up with runners on base quite a bit. Still somebody who's pounding out hits. Still somebody who can rack up some RBIs and score some runs for us. And remember, he's second base eligible. So there are not a lot of guys at that position that can do all the things that he can do. Daniel Murphy, another solid play, and another guy that I think we should be looking at today. The last guy I want to mention is Ben Revere. Ben Revere is another left-handed bat. He's been leading off for them lately. He's been pretty solid. And like we said, we want to attack Eric Johnson with these lefties. So you use a guy like Revere, you use a guy like Harper, you use a guy like Murphy. You should get these three guys doing a little bit of damage for you as left-handed bats against Eric Johnson, who has struggled with left-handed bats in the past. And like I said, it was a quick 7-game slate, so that's pretty much all we got here today. The pitching is not all that great, so that's something that we're really going to have to concentrate on. There are a lot of bats in good spots. There are a couple teams that we can stack up against some bad pitching here. So I think it's going to be a pretty interesting night in MLB DFS. Thank you guys for joining us over here at rotocurve.com. And as always, stay classy, DFS.